He had lost everything: his money, his company, his name. One freezing morning, he found something that could change his life forever. $100 million lottery ticket lying on the street. But when he discovered who it really belonged to, his next decision would cost him far more than money. Because sometimes the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, it's between fortune and forgiveness. Ethan Cole once ruled the skyline of Manhattan. His name adorned the covers of magazines, hailed as the architect of modern finance. But now the city that once bowed to him didn't even look his way. The shimmering towers he helped build were distant monuments to a man who no longer existed. His reflection in the glass looked more like a ghost than a king. He had lost everything in less than a year: fortune, company, and friends. One betrayal from his trusted partner, Richard Kane, had set off a chain of scandals that consumed his empire. The tabloids feasted on his downfall, portraying him as a symbol of greed and corruption. In truth, they weren't wrong. Ethan had built his empire on ambition, not compassion. Now, his mornings began not with meetings, but with the sound of traffic below his cheap apartment in Brooklyn. He would stare out the cracked window, clutching a cup of coffee that tasted more like regret than warmth. The world had moved on without him. He wasn't even sure if he deserved to keep up. The days blurred together, one odd job after another. He fixed air conditioners, carried boxes, anything that could earn him enough for rent. Each encounter reminded him how invisible he had become. People avoided eye contact, as if they could sense the failure that clung to him like dust. But sometimes, when the night grew too quiet, Ethan found himself walking through Manhattan again. He would gaze at the skyscrapers and remember boardrooms filled with voices that once waited for his approval. Now only silence waited. And in that silence, guilt whispered louder than ever. The betrayal had hurt, but not as much as realizing who he had become long before losing it all. He had traded love, trust, and loyalty for numbers on a screen. His empire had crumbled, but his conscience had collapsed long before. In the dim reflection of a cafe window, he caught a glimpse of himself, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing a jacket too thin for the winter. He almost laughed. The great Ethan Cole, the man who once negotiated billion-dollar deals, now counting coins for coffee. But behind the bitterness, there was something else. A quiet longing, maybe even the faintest flicker of hope that this wasn't the end. Perhaps somehow, life had stripped him bare not to punish him but to rebuild him. Still, every step forward felt like walking through ashes. And as the first snowflakes of December began to fall, Ethan had no idea that one of them would land on a ticket, a small piece of paper that would soon change everything. He didn't know it yet, but fate had already drawn his number. To Chapter 2. The Man in the Mirror. The next morning was bitterly cold. The wind howled through the narrow Brooklyn streets, carrying the smell of roasted nuts from a street vendor. Ethan walked with his collar turned up, hands buried deep in his worn-out coat pockets. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, maybe just a reason to keep walking. His boots crunched against the icy pavement. He stopped at a shop window displaying luxury watches brands he once owned in dozens. The irony wasn't lost on him. He used to measure his success by the weight of gold on his wrist. Now, he measured it by whether or not he could afford breakfast. He caught his reflection again, thinner, older, almost unrecognizable. There was no trace of the confident businessman who used to smile for cameras, only a man learning painfully what it meant to live without power. He wondered if humility always came wrapped in hunger. Later, he found a job unloading boxes at a grocery store. The manager didn't know who he was, or didn't care. To them, he was just another man trying to survive the winter. He worked silently, back aching, watching customers rush by with warm coats and full carts. That night he returned to his small apartment. The radiator rattled weakly, fighting against the cold. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a photo frame his parents long gone, smiling with a pride he no longer deserved. "You raised a man who lost himself chasing numbers," he whispered. As sleep began to take him, a thought surfaced. Perhaps the world wasn't punishing him. Maybe it was giving him a chance at test to see if he could start over, this time with a soul. The idea felt fragile, but it kept him from drowning. The next morning, the snow had thickened. Ethan stepped outside, pulling his scarf tight around his neck. The city looked cleaner under the white blanket, almost innocent. He walked without destination, just letting the rhythm of the city guide him. That's when he saw it. A small piece of paper fluttering near the curb, half buried in slush. He bent down to pick it up, shaking the snow off. It was a lottery ticket, Mega Millions, with yesterday's date. He was about to throw it away when a newsstand TV caught his eye. The announcer's voice boomed, "Last night's winning numbers for the Mega Millions jackpot 3, 17, 24, 38, 45 and Mega Ball 12. Ethan looked down. His breath caught. The numbers matched. Every single one. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole's heart began to race, not from fear, but from something dangerously close to hope. Ethan stood frozen on the corner, staring at the numbers printed on the ticket. His breath fogged in the winter air as he whispered the combination again and again, as if repetition might change reality. He glanced at the glowing screen above the newsstand. The jackpot amount blinked in bold letters, $100,000. His hands trembled. After everything he had lost, after all the humiliation and silence, fate was offering him redemption in a scrap of paper. He ducked into a small diner, heart pounding, afraid someone might see the ticket in his hand. Sitting in the back booth, he laid it flat on the table. The waitress poured coffee, and for the first time in years, Ethan smiled at a stranger. He felt the warmth of possibility again, but beneath that warmth was something colder. The kind of cold that whispers, "Don't screw this up again." Every logical part of his mind screamed to claim it immediately. He could rebuild, buy back the company, prove everyone wrong. Yet something didn't sit right. The ticket looked worn, crumpled, almost as if someone else had dropped it. He remembered seeing a boy earlier that morning on the subway, small, dark-haired, selling chocolate bars and smiling through the cold. The memory nagged at him like a loose thread he couldn't ignore. After leaving the diner, Ethan walked toward the station. He told himself he was just curious, but his steps carried the weight of conscience. Near the stairs, he saw the same boy again, Tommy Rivera. The boy's eyes darted between people, his voice shaky as he told his mother, "It was just one ticket, Mom. Maybe it flew away." Ethan stopped mid-step, the truth hitting harder than the winter wind. For a long moment, he just stood there, hidden behind a crowd, the ticket burning in his pocket like fire. He could return it, end this moral storm before it began. But as Tommy's mother hugged her son and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We still have each other," Ethan felt the claws of greed sink in. He turned and walked away. The boy's words followed him like a shadow he couldn't escape. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The ceiling above him groaned with the sound of pipes and footsteps, but all he heard was the boy's voice echoing in his head. He lay awake, staring at the ticket on the nightstand, its numbers glimmering faintly in the streetlight that filtered through the blinds. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Tommy's face not sad, but innocent, and that made it worse. By morning, the decision felt heavier. He told himself he'd just hold on to the ticket for one more day, just until he was sure. But the truth was, he wanted the world to owe him again. He wanted to look in the mirror and see someone powerful, not broken. When he stepped outside, the city was alive with motion, but to him, it felt like the entire world was watching his next move. Ethan took the subway again, this time standing where Tommy had been. He watched people pass, commuters, dreamers, beggars, each lost in their own race for survival. He realized then how invisible honesty had become in this city. No one would blame him if he kept it. No one would even know. Yet that thought didn't bring comfort, only nausea. As he stepped off the train, he spotted Maria Rivera across the platform. She looked exhausted, but composed, holding a small tray of candy. Their eyes met briefly, and something inside Ethan cracked. She smiled politely, not recognizing him, and offered a chocolate bar. He bought one for himself, one he'd never eat, and walked away without saying a word. That night, he placed the chocolate beside the ticket. The contrast was unbearable. One symbolized everything he used to chase, the other everything he'd forgotten. As he sat in silence, the city outside hummed with greed and ambition, but inside that tiny apartment, Ethan felt something far more dangerous than poverty, the slow return of his conscience. The next morning arrived with sunlight sharp enough to hurt. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the lottery ticket like it was alive. He had placed it inside a book overnight, as if hiding it could quiet the storm in his head. But now the mere sight of it made his heart beat faster, a cruel mix of fear and desire. He wondered how many men before him had fallen for the illusion of a second chance. He imagined walking back into the towers of Manhattan, dressed in a tailored suit, shaking hands with those who once mocked him. He could see their faces, the reporters, the bankers, the traitors. All of them would know that Ethan Cole had risen again. Yet with every fantasy came the faint voice of Tommy, calling for something lost. The contrast made his dreams feel cheap, hollow even in victory. He turned on the TV to distract himself. The news anchor was interviewing the lottery commissioner, showing clips of people celebrating outside stores. "Someone out there holds the winning ticket," she said. Ethan turned the volume down. The words felt directed at him. Somewhere out there, a boy and his mother were still hoping, and here he was pretending the universe had chosen him instead. Ethan stood, pacing the small room like a trapped animal. Every logical part of him screamed to keep it. "You deserve it," he whispered, "after everything they took from you." The words sounded pathetic once spoken aloud. He realized he was arguing not with the world, but with his own reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. That night, he couldn't eat. The ticket sat folded on the table as if it were watching him, judging him silently. Ethan finally slid it into his wallet, almost relieved to hide it from view. He told himself he'd decide tomorrow, but deep down, he knew the decision had already been made. He just didn't have the courage to admit which one. The following afternoon, Ethan took the subway again. He didn't know why, maybe habit, maybe guilt. When he saw Maria Rivera, she was standing near the turnstiles, her son beside her, holding a cardboard box of candy bars. Her face looked tired, but her eyes carried the quiet strength of someone who refused to give up. Ethan froze. Part of him wanted to turn away, but something stronger made him stay. Maria greeted strangers with warmth, thanking each customer with a smile that looked practiced but genuine. Ethan bought a bar just to hear her voice. "Thank you," she said, her accent soft and sincere. Her gratitude felt heavier than gold. He mumbled something in return, careful not to meet her gaze too long. For the first time in years, he felt seen, and that frightened him. As the train doors closed, Ethan watched them through the window. He saw Tommy share a candy bar with another kid, laughing as if they had no reason to be sad. The image burned into his mind, pure and painful. He remembered how simple joy used to be before everything became a transaction. The boy had lost his ticket, but not his spirit, and that realization cut deeper than any loss Ethan had known. Later that night, back in his apartment, he laid the ticket on the table again. "It's his," he whispered. The words sounded foreign, like a confession he wasn't ready to make. He reached for his phone, almost dialing the lottery office, but stopped. The fear of returning to nothing, the hunger, the shame made him freeze. He closed his eyes and tried to convince himself it didn't matter. But as sleep approached, he couldn't escape the image of Maria's eyes, calm yet strong, full of faith despite everything. They followed him into his dreams, as if asking a question he could no longer avoid. "Who are you now, Ethan?" The past has a cruel sense of timing. Just as Ethan began to feel the pull of conscience, a familiar voice echoed across the street, smooth, confident, and venomous. "Didn't expect to find you here, old friend." Ethan turned, and there stood Richard Kane, the man who had once been his partner and his ruin. Impeccably dressed, Richard looked like success carved into flesh. His grin was the kind that remembered victory. They sat at a cafe nearby, though Ethan barely touched his coffee. Richard talked about new deals, old memories, and how everyone deserves a comeback. He claimed he wanted to help Ethan rebuild, but his tone carried poison. "I know about your little secret," Richard said casually, stirring his drink. Ethan froze. "What secret?" he asked, voice trembling. Richard smiled, that knowing, cruel smile. "The ticket." The word hit like a gunshot. Ethan's pulse thundered. He tried to play dumb, but Richard's eyes gleamed with certainty. "You were never good at lying," Richard murmured. "You think I don't read faces? You found it, didn't you, the winning ticket?" Ethan said nothing, but silence was answer enough. The man across from him chuckled, leaning back. "You're lucky, Ethan. Let's make that luck profitable again." Ethan left the cafe feeling poisoned. The city's noise felt louder than ever. Horns, chatter, sirens, all blending into chaos. He couldn't shake Richard's voice from his mind. "You'll waste it. You always do." The words echoed through his ribs like thunder. The ticket suddenly felt heavier in his pocket, as if absorbing every drop of shame. That night, Ethan tried to convince himself that Richard was bluffing. But when he glanced out the window, he saw a black car idling near his building. A figure sat inside, watching. Richard wasn't bluffing. He was hunting. The next morning, Ethan woke from a restless sleep, heart pounding. The memory of Richard's smirk haunted him. He decided to take a different route to work, avoiding the cafe, the subway, even familiar corners of the block. But paranoia had a taste metallic, bitter, and he could feel it spreading through his veins. Every reflection in a window felt like eyes, every sound behind him a footstep. He returned to Maria's neighborhood that afternoon, drawn by something he couldn't name. Maybe guilt, maybe longing for the simplicity of her world. He bought another candy bar from Tommy, who greeted him with that same bright grin. "You look tired, mister," the boy said. Ethan smiled weakly. "I guess I am." For a moment, that single exchange melted the frost inside him. Maria approached, curious. "You live around here?" she asked kindly. Ethan hesitated. "Not exactly," he replied. "Just passing through." She nodded, not pressing further. Her kindness made him ache, the type that expected nothing in return. As he walked away, he caught her reflection in a store window and saw not pity, but something far worse. Quiet respect. He didn't deserve that. That night, Ethan opened his wallet again. The ticket stared back like an accusation. He thought about Richard, about Maria, about the thin line between who he had been and who he might become. "Maybe I can use it for good," he muttered. "Help them, help others." The lie felt warm, comforting until he realized it was the same excuse Richard always used. When he turned off the lights, the city outside was still alive, indifferent. Ethan lay awake, the sound of a car door closing in the distance. He didn't know it yet, but the war for his soul had already begun, and both angels and devils were watching closely. For days, Ethan lived in a fragile silence. He avoided Richard's calls and ignored the fear clawing at his mind. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and guilt, like smoke, always finds its cracks. One evening, Maria appeared at his door. Her eyes were soft but uncertain. "I saw you near the subway again," she said. "You've been helping Tommy, haven't you?" Ethan hesitated, caught between shame and longing for honesty. She stepped inside as he tried to tidy the small apartment, pretending everything was fine. On the table, half hidden under a stack of papers, was the lottery ticket. Maria noticed instantly. "Is that—" she began, but Ethan's silence answered her. The room seemed to shrink. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "It's yours?" she whispered. Ethan shook his head slowly, unable to meet her eyes. "No," he said softly. "It's your son's." The air turned cold. Maria took a step back, anger and sorrow mixing in her voice. "You had it this whole time?" Ethan nodded, words failing him. "I wanted to give it back. He stopped. What could he say? That he was afraid of being poor again? That greed still whispered in his ear? Maria's tears fell silently, and for Ethan, each one felt like a verdict. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You think you lost everything," she said, voice trembling. "But you never lost your choice, Ethan. That's the only thing that makes a man rich." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Ethan sank to his knees, the weight of her words crushing him harder than any loss of fortune ever had. He stayed there for hours, staring at the ticket on the floor. For the first time, he hated it, not for what it promised, but for what it revealed about him. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed, echoing through the city. Ethan realized it wasn't just money that destroyed him once. It was cowardice. Ethan woke the next morning to a pounding on his door. When he opened it, two men in black coats stood there. "Mr. Cole?" one asked. Before he could answer, they shoved him inside. His head hit the wall, the room spinning as rough hands searched his pockets. The ticket was gone before he could even shout. "Compliments of Mr. Kane," one of them sneered. Then just as quickly they were gone, leaving silence and blood. He stumbled to his feet, clutching his side. The wallet lay open on the floor, empty. Panic surged through his chest. Richard had made his move, and Ethan knew exactly what that meant. He dialed Maria's number, but there was no answer. The fear in his gut twisted into something primal. He ran into the cold, ignoring the pain, the city a blur of noise and neon. Hours later, he found himself standing before the old office building that once bore his name, Cole and Kane Financial Group. The sign was rusted now, but the memory of it stung like salt on a wound. A light flickered in one of the windows. He knew Richard was inside, and something deep inside told him Maria and Tommy might be too. Ethan pushed through the door, coughing at the dust. "Richard!" His voice echoed through the halls. Laughter answered him cold, deliberate. "You always come running when you're cornered," Richard called. "You should have handed it over when you had the chance." Then Ethan heard it, a small, terrified voice. "Tommy." The sound froze his blood. In that instant, fear turned to fury. Ethan moved toward the sound, each step echoing like thunder. He didn't know how this would end, only that it had to end tonight. Whatever waited ahead, fire, betrayal, redemption, he was ready to face it all. For once, not for himself. The air inside the old office smelled of dust and gasoline. Ethan crept down the corridor, guided by the faint sound of crying. In a dimly lit room, he saw Tommy tied to a chair, tears streaking down his face. Before he could reach him, a familiar voice stopped him cold. "Always playing the hero at the wrong time," Richard said, stepping out of the shadows, gun in hand. His suit was immaculate, his eyes burning with arrogance. Ethan's heart hammered as he faced his former partner. "Let him go, Richard. This isn't about him." Richard chuckled, lowering the gun slightly. "Oh, it's exactly about him. That ticket is the key to both our futures, mine in gold, yours in ashes." He held up the folded slip of paper like a trophy. "You had your chance to rise again, Ethan. You chose guilt instead." Richard's voice dripped with mockery. "You always thought you were better than me, the moral one. But look at you now, broken, begging for scraps of redemption." Ethan stepped closer, fists trembling. "You're right," he said quietly. "I am broken. But that's the difference, you still think you're whole." The words hit Richard harder than he expected, a flicker of doubt flashing across his face. Without warning, the gun fired. The bullet grazed Ethan's shoulder, knocking him to the ground. Pain seared through him, but he didn't stop. Using what strength he had left, he grabbed a fallen pipe and swung it, striking Richard's hand. The gun flew across the floor. In the struggle, a lantern toppled, shattering flames spreading fast, hungry for air and wood alike. The room erupted in chaos. Smoke thickened, fire roaring louder with every breath. Richard lunged for the ticket lying near the flames. Ethan dove too, their hands colliding over the prize that had cursed them both. And in that instant, with Tommy screaming in the background, Ethan made his choice. He grabbed the ticket and threw it straight into the fire. For a moment, time stopped. The small piece of paper curled and blackened, turning to ash in seconds. Richard froze, disbelief etched across his face. "You idiot!" he shouted, lunging at Ethan. But the fight was over before it began. The building groaned as the fire devoured its beams. Ethan stumbled toward Tommy, cutting the ropes with trembling hands. "We're leaving," he said, voice hoarse. "Now!" They ran through the smoke-filled halls as Richard's screams echoed behind them. A beam collapsed, separating them from the exit. Ethan lifted Tommy through a broken window, coughing violently as flames licked at his coat. "Go!" he ordered. "Don't look back." The boy hesitated, tears in his eyes. "But you'll go," Ethan shouted again, and Tommy obeyed. Ethan turned to see Richard trying to crawl toward him, face half covered in soot. "Help me," Richard gasped, reaching out a shaking hand. For a brief second, Ethan hesitated, then pulled him to his feet. Together, they stumbled toward the door, but another explosion knocked them apart. The last thing Ethan saw before blacking out was the fire swallowing the company's name on the wall, coal and cane, burning into nothing. He awoke to blinding white light. The sterile smell told him he was in a hospital. His body ached, every breath sharp with pain. Maria sat by his side, holding Tommy close. "You're alive," she whispered, tears glistening. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat burned. She smiled gently. "The fire's out. Richard didn't make it." Ethan closed his eyes, not in triumph, but in peace. The war inside him was finally over. Outside the hospital window, dawn painted the city in soft gold. Ethan watched the light climb over the skyline he once owned, realizing it no longer belonged to him, and that was okay. He had traded fortune for something greater, forgiveness. And in that fragile quiet, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe freely. The days that followed felt like a second lifetime. Ethan remained in the hospital for weeks, recovering from burns and broken ribs. Each morning, Maria and Tommy visited, bringing warmth into the sterile room. Sometimes Tommy would read aloud from a book, his voice filling the silence that used to haunt Ethan's nights. For the first time, he didn't feel like a failure healing, he felt like a man reborn. When he was strong enough to walk again, Maria took him to see what remained of the old office building. Only ashes and twisted beams stood where ambition once ruled. Ethan stared at the ruins quietly, wind tugging at his hospital coat. "That's what greed builds," he murmured. Maria nodded softly. "And that," she said, pointing to the sunrise beyond the smoke, "is what love rebuilds." He moved into a modest apartment near Maria's neighborhood, away from the chaos of Manhattan. The days were simple, helping her set up a small stand for her sweets, teaching Tommy math, sharing dinner with laughter instead of silence. Every small act stitched his heart back together, one thread of kindness at a time. He realized he didn't miss luxury. He missed purpose, and now he had one. One evening, he sat by the window as the city lights shimmered like constellations. His hands, once meant for signing contracts, now built shelves, fixed chairs, and held others up. He thought about Richard, about the man he used to be, and whispered, "You were wrong, old friend. I didn't waste my luck. I found it." The night was quiet, peaceful. For the first time since he could remember, Ethan didn't dream of skyscrapers or applause. He dreamed of people, real faces, real warmth, real life. The ashes of his past no longer burned. They fertilized the soil of something new. Months passed and Brooklyn began to whisper Ethan's name again, not as a fallen tycoon, but as a man who helped others rise. With Maria's encouragement, he founded a small, non-profit shelter called New Roots, a place for the homeless to rebuild their lives. The irony wasn't lost on him. Once he built towers of glass and steel. Now he built homes of hope and faith. The shelter grew quickly, fueled by donations and love rather than profit. Ethan taught financial literacy to people who had lost everything, the same way he once did. But this time his lessons weren't about wealth, they were about worth. He often said, "Money can buy chances, not change. That comes from within." And every time he said it, Maria's proud smile reminded him that he was living proof. Tommy, now thriving in school, became a beacon of joy within the shelter. He called Ethan Uncle E, and together they organized events, helped families, and painted murals on the walls. Each stroke of color turned the once gray building into a symbol of new beginnings. "This is what winning looks like," Ethan said once, watching Tommy laugh. "Not numbers, smiles." But not everyone saw Ethan's transformation. Occasionally, someone from his past recognized him on the street. "Cole," they'd whisper, half in disbelief, half in curiosity. He would simply nod and smile, neither proud nor ashamed. The man they remembered had died in that fire. What stood before them was someone entirely new, someone whole. Every night, as he closed the shelter's doors, Ethan would look up at the skyline. The towers still glittered, but they no longer defined him. What mattered was right there, the laughter echoing behind the doors, the soft hum of hope being rebuilt. For Ethan Cole, this was his second life, and for the first time it felt like his first real one. Years passed quietly, Like pages turning in a book, Ethan never wanted to end. The shelter, New Roots, had grown into a cornerstone of the Brooklyn community, a sanctuary for those who had lost their way just as he once had. Ethan's hair had turned silver, and though his body carried scars, his eyes carried peace. Every morning he arrived early, coffee in hand, to unlock the doors and greet the day with gratitude. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves danced through the street, a sleek car stopped in front of the shelter. A tall young man stepped out, carrying a familiar air of confidence tempered by kindness. "Mr. Cole?" he asked. Ethan looked up from a clipboard and smiled. "You don't need to call me that," he said softly. "It's Ethan." The young man grinned. "Then call me Tommy. It's been a long time." They sat together on a bench outside, laughter filling the air as memories resurfaced. Tommy told him about college, about how he had started his own business, one focused on affordable housing. "You inspired it," Tommy said. "You taught me what real wealth means." Ethan listened quietly, eyes misting with pride. "You did that yourself," he replied. "I just reminded you what mattered." Tommy reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "I wanted to give you this," he said. Inside was a framed photograph, a replica of the old lottery ticket, burned edges and all. Below it, engraved on the frame, were the words, "Some tickets buy luck, others buy life." Ethan's breath caught. "You kept it?" he whispered. Tommy nodded. "It was never about the numbers. It was about what you taught me that day." The sun dipped below the skyline, bathing the shelter in amber light. Ethan looked at the photo, then at Tommy, no longer a boy, but the embodiment of everything he had hoped to leave behind. "You've done more than win, Tommy," he said, voice trembling. "You've passed it on." As they stood, the city lights flickered on one by one, and Ethan smiled through tears. The world, once a battlefield, now felt like home. He lost everything, only to discover the one thing money could never buy: peace. And maybe in the end, that's what real wealth looks like. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what would you have done in his place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters.